Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Katarina and Bliss and Wade and Cheryl and Kasoon. Great to see all of you. Hope you're excited for another Masterclass and the upcoming weekend. All right. Let's go ahead and hop over to my screen and we are going to dive straight into things today. Hey, Gareth, great to see you as well. If you follow me on Instagram or Twitter, or I think I posted this on Dribble as well, I've been experimenting with an email platform design. And here's a little bit of an example of what that's going to look like. We have a light version on the left, and we have a little bit of a wild version on the right. I've also been working on a darker version as well. I'd love to hear what you all think. If you were using an email application, light or this like wild purple? Obviously, you have to use these pops of color a little bit conservatively. You don't want them all over the place, but I think it's kind of fun. I don't know. But today we're going to be working on an email design. This one right over here. We're going to keep it simple today with the lighter version. And then maybe during the next masterclass, we might change it up. Maybe go dark, maybe go purple. Who knows? We'll have some fun, right? But we're going to get as much through this as we possibly can. And then we'll finish it up probably the next masterclass. Not next week. I will be traveling next week, but hopefully the week after. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and dive into Adobe XD. And if you're new to these masterclasses, first of all, hello. I'd love to hear who you are in the chat. But if you have questions, this is live. Unless you're watching in the future, then it's not live. But if you are watching it live on Behance, throw some questions in the chat. I will take a look from time to time. I'll answer what I can. All right, now, for this particular design, we're starting off with a desktop design, and maybe later down the line, we'll convert this into mobile. But since we're starting desktop, we're gonna start with a nice large artboard, 1920 by 1080, pretty standard. And I'm gonna go ahead and maximize this, and we're gonna get going. I'm gonna start by naming my artboard home, and I'm going to make a very small tweak to the artboard color itself. Very subtle tweak. I just wanna bring the color down a little bit and maybe add a touch of blue in there. Just something like this. And we're gonna have to go back and make some changes to this later on. But the reason I'm doing that is because we're gonna have several panels, and some of the panels we're gonna want as bright and white as possible. And some of them we might wanna darken a little bit. And in some cases, we might just wanna show the artboard in the background, right? Of course, you can do the whole thing with panels, but we're gonna start at this, right? So I'm gonna grab my rectangle, shortcut key R, and drag one out, and we'll leave it somewhere around, I don't know, let's say about there. No, that's a terrible number. 309, no. Boop. 310, much better. And if you're wondering how you resize things by individual pixels, if you hold down your Command key on the Mac, Control key on Windows, and then use your arrow keys, you can resize to the right, to the left, and then also down by 1 pixel. And if you add in Shift, 10 pixels, which is great. All right, I'm gonna turn off the border for this particular panel. And this on the left is going to be the sidebar where you have things like a button to start a new message. You have all your inboxes, maybe your labels, profile, that sort of thing. And then there's going to be another panel right over here to the right. And this is going to be where your actual messages are. Now, this panel in particular is probably going to be a little bit longer than the panel that we just created. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this outwards. Let's go for, I don't know, somewhere maybe around 450. We'll see what that looks like. Now, of course, you can't see the panels, right? It just looks like one big block. And this is kind of where you have to start thinking about how you're going to separate these two elements, right? There are a few different things you can do. You can either add a border, and maybe in this case, we'll add a border on the outside, and you can adjust the border. We'll add a little bit of color in there, right? So you can do something like that. You can leave it as that, not terrible, but if you want to separate it a little bit more, then you can also shift the color slightly. Now you don't want to go too crazy, because if you do something like this, then it just looks a little bit too, looks a little bit too drastic, right? So in that case, we're gonna, start at the same color as the panel on the left and then start bringing it down a little bit. Now, I'm not too worried about the background right here because we're going to have another panel over to the side in just a moment. But we'll do something like, maybe something like this. We'll see what that looks like. And then we're going to have one more panel over to the right, possibly two more panels, but one large one for the actual message, the selected message itself. So if I grab the rectangle one more time, I'll draw one out. There we go. Make sure everything snaps. It does. And I want to leave maybe about 80 pixels on the top. And that's going to allow us to have another, either a panel or a section for commonly used actions inside of an email application. Things like reply and forward and mark as unread, things like that. And if you're designing an application like this, I would definitely encourage you to go to websites like Behance. Look up email application or email UI or email UX or whatever it might be, and just kind of take a look at what elements other people have used in their email applications, or better yet, go to the email application that you use on a daily basis, right? Gmail or Apple Mail or whatever it might be, right? Do people still use Yahoo and Hotmail? Possibly, but go there and take a look, right? So I'm going to actually copy this box here, paste the appearance, just so I bring that border over. Then I'm going to just shift the color over to white. Now, there we go. That looks pretty good, I think. Yeah. Now, one thing I do want to mention is, when you're thinking about separating all these different panels, right? We have a lighter panel, we have a darker panel, and we have a lighter panel. You can kind of put this in any direction. However, for this main panel here, this is going to be where, and I love that I'm like physically pointing at this as if you can see me pointing. This panel here, there's my mouse, is going to be where the main message, the selected message, is going to be displayed. And in my experience, I could be wrong, but in my experience, you want that particular panel where the main content's going to be the most visible and have the most contrast. So a nice bright white color is going to help, especially once we start adding our dark text. It's just going to make everything much more readable, right? All right, now up here, again, like I mentioned, we're going to have our action icons, but we're going to leave that blank for now, and then we'll get back to that in a little bit. So we've started to set up our panels, and it's looking okay. But of course, once we start adding some content, it's going to look a lot better. Got someone from Barcelona. Great to see you. And Omar, good Friday. Happy Friday. Drew, great to see all of you. All right. Now, speaking of content, let's start adding some of that content in. And we're going to start at the top, and we're going to kind of move our way down. And we're going to start with a logo. And I do have in my Creative Cloud libraries, I do have my Boop branding, which I've been using in a lot of different experiences lately. Now, obviously, this logo is white. We don't want that because if we place it against a white background, we're not going to be able to see it. So this is where we can start to define some colors. So let's go ahead and use something like this. It's a nice dark blue. I talk about this a lot, just adding a little bit of color to your designs. Of course, you could go, pure black or a little bit gray, but I just found adding a little bit of blue in there, it just softens it up just a touch, right? And it looks really nice. Now, the next thing I might want, my allergies are going crazy today. The next thing I might want is, considering this is an email application, we may want some sort of an icon to help us out, right? So if I go over to Nucleo, which I've used many times in the past, it's a third-party icon manager, type out something like either mail. These look pretty good over here. I might grab something like this, which is from the Stockholm library. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard and then paste it. And if you don't have icons in an icon manager and you want some icons for your project, if you head to the plugins panel right down here at the bottom left-hand corner, there is the Icons for Design plugin. If you don't have that one installed, hit the plus button at the top right-hand corner of the panel, and you can search for it and install it. And then you can type out, same thing, mail, or, we've got a lot of different envelopes in there. Sometimes you might have to get a little bit more specific and type out envelope, right? It's a lot of options, and these are all open source, so you can use them in your projects freely. All right, so here, I don't necessarily want the check mark in this particular icon. And the nice thing is they're all SVG, so I can just dive in here And I don't need all these groups either. So I can get rid of the check. There we go. And I might want to make this larger. And possibly we can start defining our primary color in this particular case. So if I switch over to the fill and then maybe set, let's go for a nice blue. Something in this range here. And as I'm starting to add some of these colors, I definitely want to make sure to go to my document assets right over here and then start adding them, because we're going to be using this blue and probably even this dark blue a lot in this project. And the last thing we would want to do is to have to go through the entire thing and make changes to all of them if our primary color changes, right? So by adding these colors, and I can add them all at once, then later down the line, if we have, you know, a bunch of these blues on this artboard or even many artboards, we can just make the change once and it's going to propagate everywhere else. Now, another thing you might want to do is you might want to add in some guides. So maybe, you know, 32 pixels over here. Maybe we'll add a guide over here as well, just to make sure that everything lines up really nicely. This I might want to snap over. There we go. Close enough, right? And now just to make sure that this fills in nicely, I'm going to dive in here. I'm going to move the letter P over somewhere right about there, almost. That could work. And then I'm going to dive in here and just make changes to this particular shape. There we go. And maybe I'll move this over as well, this subtraction. All right. That could work. It might be a little bit too large, but we're going to run with it for now. I also want to make sure to group these two elements, and I'll call this logo. And I should probably also rename sidebar, and this is going to be our messages, and this one message. Beautiful. All right. So the next thing we might want is maybe right below this logo, we might want a nice large button to start composing a new message. So with the rectangle, one more time, I swear everything can be created with a rectangle these days. I'm going to draw one out and we'll put it, I'll set it about maybe 58 pixels high. And we'll see if that looks a little bit too large in just a moment. And I might want to round out the corners a little bit. I don't want to go too much, but just a little bit. If I do something like 16, it might be a little bit too rounded unless you're going for that style. But it's at the point now where if you're going to go this round, you might as well go all the way around it, right? Again, if that's the style of this application. But I want just, you know, very subtle rounded corners. So probably around 8 pixels looks pretty nice. And I want to make sure, considering this is probably, you know, a main call to action, I'm going to hop over to my document assets and apply our lovely blue. Now, on the inside of the shape, we're going to want probably 2 elements. We're going to want one, a text layer to let users know what they're going to be doing if they press this button, and maybe even an icon to give them a bit of a visual. So if I grab my text tool, shortcut key T, I'll type out something like new message. And obviously the gray on the blue, probably not going to cut it. So we're going to first start by switching the color over to white, and then we can start experimenting with a few different typefaces. You know, I've been using something like Astoria Sans a lot, which is a little bit, it's not bad, but I think for this particular application, I want something a little bit more traditional. It has some interesting elements to it, especially if I switch over to Astoria. It's definitely got some fun elements to it. Again, not terrible, but something like Avenir Next, which this particular typeface is not on Adobe fonts, but if you want something similar, something like Open Sans, you know, very similar, not identical. There was Open Sans and then Avenir Next, right? Very similar, but Open Sans is available on Adobe fonts. And I'll leave this somewhere around maybe 18 pixels. I don't want it too large. And then over to the left, we're going to want our icon. So with my ellipse, I'll draw one out, maybe about 24 pixels. And then on the inside of this, simply want a plus button, right? And, you know, of course, we could grab our text tool and create a plus button like that, right? but I might want rounded corners to the plus button. And of course there are, rounded typefaces and things like that, but I find, grabbing your pen tool and drawing one out and maybe sampling our blue, increase the size, maybe I'll round out the caps a touch. I might want to thicken that up a little bit, but I'm going to take a look in just a second, and then I want to duplicate this, Command and Control D, and then we're going to rotate it by 90 degrees inside of the Properties Inspector, and now we have a plus button. Yeah, I think I might want to thicken that up just a little bit. That could work, and maybe... There we go. All right, now I can position my text. And I'm going to make sure to group these elements here. This will be add. And then new message, and then also this container. I'm going to group that, and I'll call this button new. All right, so now again, very similar to the color discussion earlier, knowing I'm going to be using this button or even similar buttons throughout this project, I definitely want to make sure to create a component out of this. And I want to also make sure that this is centered. There we go. And once it is, I'm going to select the overall group, or you can select the individual objects and then create a component. Command and Control K, or you can go to your document assets, or over here within the Properties Inspector to the right. This will allow you to add additional states if you wanted to. Might get to that a little bit later, but for now, I think this looks pretty good. Possibly a little bit large, but we can always make changes to that later. All right, now going down this sidebar, we're not going to work on the entire sidebar because I do want to get to some of the other elements, and we've done a few sidebars in the last few masterclasses, but I do want a few different labels. Things for like inbox and sent and star, draft, and that sort of thing. So we'll do a few of them, and then we'll move on to something else. So we're going to want something like our inbox, right? We'll do that, and this is going to be the selected section. So this one's going to probably be highlighted in blue, and we'll keep it at 18, but I might want to drop the weight a little bit to about maybe demi-bold. And I think that looks pretty good. And then we're going to want another... I swear my allergies are just driving me crazy. Always when I'm about to stream, they're just like, oh yeah, you've got allergies. All right, so we're going to want some sort of other icon, like an inbox or a box or something. I think this one looks pretty good. This is from the Unicon library. I'm going to paste that. Where did it go? There it is. We'll probably want to keep this consistent with this color here. And I think 24 for the size looks pretty good. But of course, once we start adding additional elements going down this section, then we might have to go back and make some tweaks, but I think this looks pretty decent. That could work. And then over on the right-hand side, depending on which section you're looking at, you might have a little bit of a label that says how many possibly unread messages you have. So for that, what I think we could do is grab the rectangle and draw one out, and maybe we'll round this out into like a pill or capsule shape. And then, we could of course use our same blue, but I think it might be a little bit too much. There might be too much blue in this case. So I think what we might want to do is kind of set a color like this. It has a little bit of blue in it still, but it's also a little bit more neutral. And then inside here, we can put our text. So let's say we have 192 unread messages, right? And I might want to pull in that dark color here. And then probably we're going to definitely want to drop the size. And I think the weight could be okay. We might want to try bold. Yeah, demi might work as well. Now, one thing we might want for this particular element is we might want it to automatically resize as we're making changes, right? And that's where padding is going to come into play. Because the last thing we want is to do something like this, where it's, 19,000 and whatever. Then we have to move things over, and then we have to grab this and resize this. No one wants to deal with that, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to select both of these elements, place them into a group or a component, and I'll call this, maybe I'll call this badge. And then we want to do a few things here. We want to first turn on padding, which is going to look at the background layer, which is the layer at the very back of this particular group or component, and it's going to automatically set the padding around it based on the objects inside. And what's nice is you can now dive in here and make changes very easily. So maybe we want, let's say 8 pixels on each side, right? And maybe I'll bump this up because to compensate for the text layer. Make sure it's rounded. And the next thing we want is, because if I dive in here and just change this to whatever, it's going to go from left to right. So it's going to push that badge over to the right, but we actually want it to go the other way. So I'm going to make sure to align the text to the right. And that will allow me, if I dive in now, let's say 12,000, whatever, it's going to do exactly what we expect, right? Tim says 192, those are rookie numbers. I've seen some people's inboxes that are just absolutely bananas. I don't know how they deal with that. It gives me anxiety just looking at it, and I don't even know the people. There we go. Something like that could work. Again, some of this information might be a little bit too large, and we might want a little bit more padding, but the nice thing is we can easily do that, right? Yeah, it might be too big. That could be better, I think. All right. And I think this might be a little bit too far from the inbox, so maybe I'll bump it to about 16. I think that could work. All right, so we have one of our sections complete, but now we want quite a few more going down this sidebar, right? Again, we're not going to do all of them, but what I do want to show you is how stacks works. So I'm going to make sure to select all of these objects. I'm going to place them into a group, Command and Control G, and I'm going to call this inbox. And I want to make sure to place this group into a larger group, and I'll call this sections or links, or there's probably a name for this, but we're going to run with that. And then I want to, over in the Properties Inspector, turn a stack on. Now, because inside of the stack, there's only technically one object, which is the group that's inside of it. It defined it as a horizontal stack, but I'm going to define it as a vertical stack, so it goes up and down. And now I can dive in here and simply duplicate. And I can, make as many of these as I want, and it's going to continue moving down. As you're going to see in a moment, we can very easily rearrange some of those. And we can also space them out just like that. Let's try about, I don't know, we'll try 32 for now. Now this one might be something like sent, and maybe in this case, the sent might not have any unread messages. So we're gonna maybe delete that, or we can also hide that as well. And then we might want a different icon. So maybe something like, sent, no, maybe like a little paper airplane type of thing. Maybe this guy over here looks pretty fancy, or maybe this one. There's a lot of different paper airplanes that we can possibly use. I mean, this one looks pretty good. There we go. Pop that over here. Let's get rid of the inbox. And then for this one, because it's not going to be the active link, right? It's going to be a non-active link. We probably want to drop down the color. So we don't want blue, because that kind of indicates that this is active. So we can probably go for either our dark color that we defined earlier, or we can kind of define a new color and maybe bring this up a little bit, just so it's not too bold. But of course, you don't want too many colors in a project like this. And the difference between this and this is very subtle, but it could work, right? There we go. And I'm going to duplicate, oops, wrong shortcut. And this will be sent, and then duplicate. And then we might want to do something like maybe starred. Now for this one, we could, of course, grab an icon from one of our icon libraries, or we can create one of our own. So if I grab my polygon tool, shortcut key Y, I can draw one out like this. Let's get rid of my sent. And then we might want maybe, whoops. 5 sides for this star. Now, of course, this doesn't look like a star at the moment, but over here to the right, we can then define the star radius, or the ratio, I should say. So if I just drop this down a little bit, we now have a bit of a star. We can also round out the corners a touch. Now, it looks a little bit strange right now, but if we go ahead and reposition the border, either on the center or the outside, it's looking a little bit better, right? A little bit. That could work. Sure, why not? All right, Daniel says, thank you for the assistance the other day. Oh yeah, so I think if I remember correctly, you were working on, and that's something I want to do as a video, because it's stacks and padding, which I'm kind of using right now in responsive resize, can be a little bit tricky to get your mind around. And I think if I remember correctly, what Daniel was working on, he was working on some sort of an object here, just as a little bit of a side tangent. And he had like a big number in the middle, I think. Something like this. And then he had a word down below. I forget what the word was. Let's just say new. I think it might have been new. Right? And his idea, he wanted essentially this card, and he wanted to be able to adjust the number here. So when it goes over to the side, the card resizes. Now, typically, that wouldn't be so difficult, because you would, grab all these objects, place them into a group, Command and Control G, turn padding on, and then, it would work, right? But what he also wanted to do, he wanted the new to also move, kind of stay centered with the card, right? But this is where it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because he could very easily just change the text alignment to center, and look, there it goes, it stays in the center. However, the design he was working on, this card had to stay essentially locked to the left-hand side of the design. And he also wanted new to stay centered, right? So one thing that might help all of you if you're watching is to realize that you can create a background of a padded group with another group or component. And whatever's inside of that group will move along with the padded group, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't, but let me show you. So let me undo this for a second. Let me undo until I have my group that's not padded right now. And I want to make sure to select the new text. And this is probably a terrible color to use because the border, the bounds, is also blue. Let me change this color. Right, so you want to select the new text or whatever you want to move with the background. Also select the background container, place that into a group, Command and Control G, make sure it's at the very back of the stack. I'm going to name it background, just so, whoop, I spelled that wrong. Background, just so you can all see what we're working with. And then you want to turn padding on the overall group. That way, hello, right? And as you can see, the new text down at the bottom moved with the container in the background because it was included with the background, and the entire object remained on the left-hand side. And of course, this also works if you right align this as well. Hello. So, a little bit of a side tip, but I always love those challenges, trying to figure out things like Daniel sent over. So if anyone else has weird questions like that, definitely tweet it at me. Anyways, little side tangent. Again, so we're not going to go through this entire sidebar, but just to kind of show you what you would essentially kind of work on is you would continue to duplicate these objects, make some changes to the text, make some changes to the icons, and you would kind of move on with your life from there. You can also, inside of this same stack, create something like a line to separate, right? Something like this. And then you can also create almost like subfolders or sub areas, right? So down here, you can type out something like, whoops, that's very large text. Folders. Definitely don't want text that large. Make that nice and small, right? Maybe I'll sample that color. And then this will be essentially, you know, a little bit of a category. That's probably the word I was trying to get to. Now, here's another little tip, because many of you might be working in a stack, right? You have the word folders, and you might want another object alongside the text layer that says folders, right? So maybe right about here, you might want some sort of an arrow. So you grab your pen tool, and you maybe activate the square grid, and you click and, why did it do that, right? It's actually doing what it should be doing, right? Because you're in a stack and you're not inside of a group, it's placing a new object either above or below the existing object. So again, doing exactly what it's supposed to do, but not what you want it to do in this case. So if you are in a stack and you want an object beside another object, make sure that object is grouped. So Command and Control G, and I'll call this, let's say, header. And then inside of the group, you can now create boop, boop, and boop. There we go. Where my grid? Where there? Boop, boop, there. Boop, boop. And I'll maybe grab this color here. Maybe I'll round out the caps, round out the all the things. I always press that shortcut to open one password. Wrong one. There we go. Okay. Might still be a little bit too large. And then maybe a little bit too thick as well. And move this over. We have folders, something like that. I might want to bold this just a little bit, maybe bump up in size a touch more. Definitely don't want it right aligned. Yeah, that could work. Maybe. There we go. And possibly over to the right-hand side, we might want also a very simple plus button to add a new folder, right? So again, very similar to what we did up top on our new message button. You can do something like this. Maybe I will grab, oops. I moved things around without knowing. Maybe I'll grab this color here. I definitely want to add this to my assets. Boop, apply that there. And then make a line, round it out, duplicate, rotate, we've done this already. And then maybe we'll apply this color to the border. That could work. Someone said something about dark mode. Of course it's Tim. What did Tim say? Howard has mastered the dark arts of Adobe XD. Someday we'll also master dark mode. One day, Tim. One day, Tim. I don't know when that day will come, but one day. We can always dream, right? I literally have dreams about dark mode. This is my life, people. I have dreams about dark mode. And those dreams never come true. Sad. Daniel says, honestly, I tried every configuration I can think of except what he showed me. That's the I guess maybe the downside or the upside of doing a job like mine is I've come across every possible situation, I think, for things like stacks and responsive resize and whatever, the weirdest of situations. And of course, when new features are in testing internally, I try to break them as much as I can. So I also gain some knowledge in that area. But anyways, so I have this little header over here, and I might want another kind of similar thing down here. So if I duplicate this, I can very easily, oops, I don't want both of them. Boop. Just move things around just like that. Oh, I had 32. Okay. There we go. 32. Fancy. And this might be, our folders, right? So this could be maybe a designs folder. And just for argument's sake, I'm going to just swap out the icon, and then we're going to move on to the next panel. This is a fun icon, right? What was that from? Unicon as well. Tim says, that's what you get for sleeping without a nightlight. Oh, Tim. Oh, Tim. There we go. That could work, right? And then, of course, you can also, move things around in your stack. So even though you have a vertical stack, you can also kind of shift things horizontally. So if you wanted, nested folders or things like that, you can do like that. There we go. All right, we're gonna move on. I don't wanna spend too much time on this sidebar, but I do want to just bump this up a little bit so it's consistent. And there we go. We might get back to the sidebar eventually, or I'll do some Martha Stewart magic and poof, sidebar, right? Actually, you know what? I'm going to do that. Oh no, I selected the wrong object. Copy, paste. Oh, look at that, sidebar, magic. All right, where's my other sidebar? I want to delete that. Poof. Fancy. All right, so what we're going to do here is in the next section, we want a few additional things. Again, this is going to be for the inbox, and this is going to be the main panel that's going to display all your messages, right? Your unread messages, your read messages, anything that hasn't been sorted. But you also might have some other things like a header. You might have a way to filter, maybe some text information, possibly even a way to search through your messages, right? So right at the top, we might want to start off with our header, and this is going to let us know where we are in the application. So I'm going to go ahead and type out something like inbox, and I might want to bump this up in size, maybe to about 26, and I think I'm going to keep it at bold, and this color looks pretty nice as well, and we'll leave it right about here, but I'm going to move it over about 32, because you might remember at the beginning, we have about 32 pixels, not about, exactly 32 pixels from padding on this sidebar here. So we're going to probably want to keep it relatively consistent. Hey, Cornell, and hey, AK and Omar. Great to see all of you. Anyone who's just joining, hello. And then underneath here, we might want a little bit of sub information, possibly, how many messages are inside of the inbox and how many have maybe been unread. AK is asking, do we have video? If you're asking about video support in XD, we certainly do. I was going to hopefully get to that, but rectangle, hop over to Finder, find a very cute video of something, right? And boop, pop it in there. You can dive in here. And then over on the right-hand side, you can choose when you want it to play back. In this case, play automatically. You can even trim the video, which is amazing. You know what? I like that little swipe at the beginning. I'm going to trim it at the end. And then there it is, right? Fancy. We might get back to video later on in the masterclass, or maybe next one, but we'll see. So under here, so we might want, let's say there's 1,203, and then maybe there'll be, I don't know, 200 and, I'm using a lot of twos, 491 unread. Now this is undead. It's an interesting inbox. Unread. Maybe it's like a fantasy World of Warcraft type of inbox type of thing. I don't know. But that was a weird typo. Or was it a typo? I don't know. So this is secondary information. So we definitely want this quite a bit smaller than our header, because we definitely want to save some room for other things. So maybe we'll drop it down to about 16. I might want to drop the weight as well. And then possibly use a color. Nope, definitely not that. Maybe I'll bring this up a little bit. Now, while we're on this subject is, we might want to start making sure that our contrast and accessibility is up to par, which I can almost guarantee you in this case, it's probably not, right? So, there's more talk about the video. Okay. So over here, this text layer on this lighter background, for many people, it might be very difficult to read. So what I would suggest is go to your plugins, grab a plugin called Stark. Now, they recently updated it, so you need to create a free account in order to check for contrast and things like that. But once you have a layer selected, you can go into the contrast section, and it's going to let you know, in this case, it's screaming at me that none of this passes, right? So what it's doing is it's looking at the currently selected layer, and it's looking at the layers behind it and checking all these accessibility things to make sure it passes or doesn't pass, right? In this case, it does not pass. So essentially, it's letting you know that there may be people out there who cannot read this. And even though you can read this, and I can read this, many people cannot. So it gives you suggestions down here. Now, the suggestions, if you click on it, you need a pro account to actually apply the suggestions from the panel itself. And by the way, the pro account for Stark is just an amazing, amazing company. They do great things for accessibility. But in this case, you can very easily, use an eyedropper to sample, right? And there you go. Look at that. Now, in most cases, it doesn't have to pass AAA 7:1, but as long as you grab these three, it should work. But just darkening a little bit will work as well, right? So this one definitely passes. Our blue is going to pass quite nicely. Or no, I guess it doesn't. I thought it would. Maybe not. I lied. All right. So over here to the right, we're going to want a filter icon, possibly. We'll get to that in just a second. But I also want maybe a way to search through your inbox, right? So I'm going to very quickly draw out a guide here to snap with our button. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can grab my rectangle, draw this out. I might also want a guide to snap right here. Ooh, I almost had that perfectly, right? And then we're going to want 32 on this side as well. There we go. Just to make sure that things are nicely aligned. It's not necessary. Some people have the search bar right at the top, but I think it looks kind of nice over here. And then we're going to want to make sure, to also keep consistent corners. So 8 pixels, for example. Maybe we'll keep this at white and then add a little bit of a border. We can also add either this color here. It might be a bit too dark. Maybe I'll bump it up a little bit. Something like that. Again, this probably will not pass accessibility, but the contents inside of it, we're going to want to make sure that they do pass accessibility, right? So I'm going to make sure we might want something like a magnify glass, and this is kind of where our icons come into play. Search. And we'll do, maybe the feather icon is quite nice. It's a little bit too large, I think, and I think the border is a bit too thick. Drop that. Maybe I'll bump it over this way, maybe about 24. That could work. And then search? No. Search. I can't spell today. Then again, I can never spell. That should do. Oop. All right. And then I did mention that we might want a filter icon up here, but I do want to make sure to at least get a few messages looking pretty decent down here. So I'm going to add a few more guides just so I can make sure that things line up really nicely. And then the message preview itself is going to consist of a few things. It might consist of a profile photo for the sender and possibly, the name of the sender, the subject, and maybe a little bit of a preview of what the actual message is, right? So I'm going to go ahead and grab my ellipse tool this time. Of course, I could use a rectangle and just round it out completely, but let's use an ellipse. Maybe we'll even create a squircle. That could be fun. Maybe I'll leave it about 54. I'll get to the fill in just a moment. And then over here, we're going to want the sender name. I'm going to grab someone from the chat. This is going to be Wade. And I'll bump this up in size a little bit. Maybe I'll bump it up in weight. I'll bump it up in Wade. Wait. It's just, my jokes are just the worst. They're just the worst. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I put you all through this. And this will be the subject. And this is going to be a little bit smaller, so I'm going to bump it down. Might also bump it down in weight a little bit as well. And then we're going to want the actual message preview. Now for this one, instead of regular point text, or in this case, as of a bunch of updates ago, it's called auto width, we're going to want auto height. And what this is going to allow us to do, it's going to allow us to pull this over to the end here. So it's going to automatically bump down to the next line as Tim's slow clap. It doesn't even deserve a slow clap, Tim. It's going to automatically bump down to the next line as I'm typing. So I'm going to keep this maybe about 16. Maybe I'll actually bump it down to about 14. And then maybe bump the weight down as well. Hey, Glenn from New Jersey. So if I start typing something like preview of the body message goes, whoops. goes in this area should be 2 lines max, right? So you notice that once I got to the end there, it automatically bumped it down to the next line, which is great. And then possibly over to the right-hand side, we may want a very, small-ish text layer, maybe something around 14. I'm also going to align it to the right, and I'm going to bump this down to about 14 and maybe the weight as well, just to indicate maybe when this message was sent. So what day is it today? The August 26th. So Aug 26th. Or if it's, many email applications, if it was sent the same day, you can just do something like, 11:20 a.m. Something like that. And then I want to make sure to select all this information here, pop it into a group. I'm going to call this message. And I may also want right down below inside of this group a little bit of a separator, because we're going to have many messages going down this panel and we want some way to separate them. Of course, you can add different colored backgrounds and things like that, but I think if we keep it simple and just add a little bit of a separator here, that could work. There we go. And finally, we need a photo. So if I hop over to my Creative Cloud libraries, I do have my toy faces installed. Wade will put the link to toy faces inside of the chat. And boop, there we go. All right, now I did mention that we might want many of these messages going down this panel. And that's, again, very similar to the sidebar where stacks comes into play. So if I place this one message into a group, Command and Control G, I'll call this messages, and I'm going to turn on a stack just like that. And then I want to make sure to set this to a vertical stack, and then I can dive in and duplicate and duplicate and duplicate, right? And then we have messages. Now, of course, I might want, very similar to here, we have about 20, probably about 24. Let me just bump this up a little bit. Let's grab that. Let's get rid of that decimal, this one here. So we have 24 there. So what we're going to want is 24 here as well. That could work. All right. So if I duplicate a few of these down, we now have messages, right? And I can just keep going and going and going and going. Now, one thing you might want to do at some point is set up a scroll group so you can very easily scroll through this long list of messages. So I do have this messages group selected. If I go ahead and over in my properties inspector, I can turn on a vertical scroll group. And this will allow me to set exactly where this window is. So right about here at the top, and then right down here at the bottom, it's snapped really nicely. So now I can dive in here and just scroll through all these messages, and that search bar stays right in place. Now, at the bottom, there is a little bit of padding down there, but let's say you wanted some additional padding towards the bottom. So if I go inside of the scroll group and select the messages group, over here within the properties inspector, currently padding on this stacked group is set to 0, but if I switch it over to this object here, which allows me to define the padding individually of all the sides, I can then go to the bottom. So this is top, right, bottom, and then left. Bottom, I can add maybe 24 pixels down to the bottom. And now we have a little bit of extra padding down there, right? But we did have that natural padding with that break. So we may not need that in this case, but in some cases you may want to add that, right? All right. That looks pretty good, but one thing we might also want is a way to kind of show which message is currently the selected message. And there are a few ways of doing that, right? One way you can do that is you can do it on the actual message itself. However, if you want something a little bit larger, right? If you want maybe a border, you're going to notice that it's going to push the stack around, right? So in that case, what you can do is do it actually inside of the scroll group, which is going to be called messages, but also outside of the stacked group. So if I go right about here, I can do something like this. I'll line it up with that break, and I'll move it to the back. I'll zoom on in here. Make sure this lines up nicely. And then possibly on this side here, we might want a little bit of a color indicator. So I can duplicate this, bring this on back, and then maybe apply our lovely blue, boop, just like that. And then for these ones, we probably don't need the separator to be showing here. Now, if I were to simply hide the separator like that, it's going to remove it essentially, right? So the stack is going to be affected. So in this case, I'll probably just want to drop the opacity to 0 for this one and this one, because this object here, this white box, is kind of that separator for the selected object, right? Or the selected message in this case. There we go. And the scrolling still works. Everything looks pretty good. Beautiful. So we have our selected message. But of course, you know, we want to be able to display that message over here to the right. And that's probably where we're going to wrap things up. So at the top here, we're going to want more information about the sender. We might want some things on the right-hand side, and we might want a separator and then the actual body copy of the message itself. So we're going to very quickly kind of run through some of this, and then maybe during the next masterclass, we will get back to that. I'm going to copy this. Maybe I'll copy Wade's name as well. And then over here, now this might be a little bit too close. If I do line things up with that search bar, it might be a little bit too close. So I might add a little bit more. Let's try about 56 there. So there'd be Wade. We'll keep his name there. And then down below, we'll put like our 2. Oops. Something like that, right? And this could probably be dropped in size a little bit or a lot. And then we might want maybe like a reply to. And I'm going to grab a name from the chat. Glenn. There we go. Make sure this all aligns nicely. And then we're going to want our border view all the way across here. We'll worry about sizing and all that fun stuff in just a little bit if we have time, but I do want to get to the actual message very quickly. And I would encourage all of you, if you're designing an actual application like this, try your best to put actual copy in here and not just like subject of email or lorem ipsum or something like that, right? Try to put actual stuff in there. I might run out of time, so I might not be able to at the moment, but definitely try if you can. And then down here, we might want I'm gonna switch this over to auto height and then view, cross, 18, maybe this will be medium. Body copy of email, running out of time. And then I think at this point we can probably start setting up a stack, right? So if I go ahead and group these two objects, this will be our message. I'm going to turn a stack on. Now this time it automatically set it as a vertical stack because there are 2 different objects inside of this group. So if I duplicate this down, this could be all the best Wade. And then I might want an object like right in between here, right? So if I just go ahead and view, I think I missed it, but I can very easily move that around. And it moves really nicely. And this is kind of where I can probably put that little video, or maybe I can put this iguana looking thing. Chameleon, I don't know what this is, but it's pretty cool looking. Maybe I'll round out the corners a little bit. Let's go for 8. I'll have it play actually, you probably don't want it to play automatically in an email. That would annoy me. So maybe I'll play on tap. We can also put maybe a play button in here somewhere. Per my last email, Wade says, ... Here is an iguana looking thing, which is probably not an iguana. I don't even know what this thing is. There we go. Space this out a little bit. Let's go for 24. You can also enter the values directly in your properties inspector as well, just like that. And that's looking not too bad. If I go ahead and play this, tap on it, we've got our little iguana chameleon looking thing. For all I know, it could be a crocodile. It's probably not, but there we go. So we've gone through a lot. We talked about stacks, we talked about padding, talked about all sorts of different things. In the next masterclass, again, not next week, but probably the week after, we're going to wrap this up, and we might also talk about, transitioning this to a darker or an experience with a lot more color, like the purple one you saw earlier. Anyways, that's gonna wrap things up for me for today. Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few minutes, and I will be back not next week, but the week after with another XD masterclass. Thanks, everyone.